Welcome to the Pain-Free Athlete Podcast. I'm your host, Dana Jones. I am a certified personal trainer, and I'm here to help you achieve your fitness goals without pain. In each episode, I'll share tips and strategies that will help you stay safe and pain-free while you're working out. I'll also interview experts in the field of fitness and pain management. So if you're ready to learn how to stay active and pain-free, then subscribe to the Pain-Free Athlete Podcast today. Hi, everyone, and welcome to the Pain-Free Athlete Podcast. I'm your host, Dana Jones, and today I have the pleasure of a wonderful guest, Dr. Tawny Kross, a renowned physical therapist and pain and wellness coach. Dr. Kross is celebrated for her innovative approaches to integrating psychology into physical therapy, helping countless individuals overcome chronic pain, and she brings a wealth of experience from her work in both the VA hospital and her own private practice. Welcome, Dr. Kross. How are you?
I am well. Thank you for having me on.
So I love this because of the fact that psychology sometimes can be seen as a entity of its own. And the fact that you're bringing it into the physical therapy world is amazing. And can you share a little bit about why did you think the two went together and how has that kind of helped your practice?
Sure. I will say in the beginning, I don't know that I necessarily thought that the two went together. It was this very sort of maze-like journey that started when I first got out of PT school and I went into a veterans hospital to work. And I remember thinking, okay, I've got my stretches and I got my exercises and I'm going to help people with pain. And then I just came up to a huge wall, seeing that 80-90% of the people that I served had pain that just maybe had short-term relief, but they kept coming back to physical therapy. And there was clearly something that was off about the way that I was taught, and I didn't know what that was. And I was like, well, maybe it's me. Maybe I'm not, maybe I don't know the right exercises or the right. And I kept on hounding for maybe the first couple years, like the movement approach. And at some point in time, I was like, okay, maybe we come out of the movement approach and we start looking at other things. So I did explore psychology, the neuroscience of pain, and I explored um, hypnosis and nutrition and all the fun things. And it was really learning not just these separate tools or separate skills and separate perspectives. It was learning how to marry all these things together that truly helped me be able to see movement and physical approaches differently.
Okay, so you had to have a good toolbox.
Yes, there was not just a one-sided toolbox or one hammer that works sort of thing.
So when you bring in psychology, I think you talked about like psychologically informed physical therapy. What does that look like?
Yeah, so psychologically informed physical therapy is, I want to say there definitely is strong roots in the science behind pain, because part of helping people heal pain is helping them understand that their body is not physically broken or in some sort of harm's way. And then beyond that, it's looking at how the way you think, the way your emotions are, the way that you interface with the world, your environment, etc., and all those things together, how they impact pain and how they impact how you might make different choices in terms of movement and how you might look at those movement approaches and also, no pun intended here, move differently.
So you work with veterans. And so from experience, I could tell you we are a stubborn bunch. And so how do you interweave this into care? I'm sure the end goal for them also is to be done, right? And as much as they possibly love you, but not have to come back because my back hurts or,
Right.
whatever may
Exactly.
be coming in. How do you kind of get this through without possibly offending their sensitivities?
Sure. That's such a good question. And I will say I am lucky in the sense that by the time that people come to me, they are ready for something different. They're like, okay, like I'm being sent to you because apparently you do something different than physical therapy or traditional
Mhm.
physical therapy. I'm like, yes, great. I will say though, there is a consistent theme that I have to roll through, which is first demythifying, let's say, their understanding. And I usually go with helping people see how the way that they saw pain before isn't helpful nor true. So not only will I quote statistics like, half of the world has degenerative disc disease and arthritis and tears, etc., and they don't have any pain, which is usually mind blowing to people because they're like, well, how can they have not any pain? I have pain. And I'm like, okay, I just want you to see that there's like a hole in the model. If only 50% is accurate, this is a model that's not functioning better than a coin toss. And then I will also use examples like most people, like 99% of the world, have found bruises and scratches on their body at some point in time. And they're like, where did this come from? And usually when I bring that example up, people are like, yeah, why is that? And I'm like, I know, right? Isn't that an interesting thing? Because we want to show people that their injury or tissue damage does not necessarily correlate to pain. And the reverse is true, which is that pain does not necessarily mean injury. And this is especially helpful for a veteran population because some of them are combat vets where they've been in the battlefield and they've had a gunshot wound while they were in the middle of a combat zone and they didn't feel anything. And they might say something like, okay, well, it was probably because of shock. I'm like, yes, but what is shock? Shock is your nervous system going, whoa, I need to flood my system with adrenaline. I need to triage the system so I know that I cannot pay attention to the gunshot wound. I need to get out of this bigger danger. Otherwise I might get dead. And with that triaging process, your system does not feel pain because it knows that right away, if it addresses pain, you're likely to be more injured or more hurt in some shape or form. So I oftentimes like to use that idea because I think a lot of veterans connect with it.
Makes sense, right? Is that our brain is got this built-in safety mechanism
Mhm.
that says, you know, take the hole in your body versus not existing any longer. And we've had studies or read studies about people who have injured themselves and have done crazy things in the process because the bigger danger needed to be addressed before their common or whatever, the broken leg or broken arm or something like that. So, in your experience, what is stress like in terms of a factor in their pain?
Sure. I think it's helpful first to define stress because I want to say that people often define stress as something that is loud and immediate and they can feel like they're like, oh, I don't work. I'm retired. I don't have any stress. And it doesn't mean that their body isn't still undergoing some sort of stress response. So I like to define the fact that your system has essentially two choices when it meets something, when it thinks something, feels something, etc., something, it decides, is this thing stressful or threatening or dangerous? Or is this thing safe and something that I can relax and recover from? And the stress can be anything from, sure, a bear chasing after you, or it can be the stress of worrying about saying the right thing, or the stress of failing because you learned your whole life that you had to be so perfect in order to achieve. And then relaxing or safety can be what we would say fuzzy bunnies. And it's not always the same thing for everybody because for I want to say veterans in particular, when I work with them, if they've had so much trauma in their history, quiet sleep, relaxation,
No good.
yeah, can be stressful. So that is why I think it's important to define stress first. It depends on what it is to your individual body.
I am not a combat veteran, but being quiet, meditating, all those things felt terribly unsafe.
Yeah, absolutely.
Being busy felt appropriate, and that's why for a lot of, I think, medical professionals that ran into me and dealing with my migraines, there's, "Well, how many days did you suffer?" And it's, "Well, all the days." And it's, "Well, how many days did you call in sick?" And I'm, "Well, none of them." Because for me, it felt like a weakness
Hmm.
to not continue to go forward
Hmm.
even though I was in pain.
Right, right. Which is kind of its own little stress ball, right? Because
Mhm.
you have the stress of push, 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 push. ignore your pain, ignore your body signals, and your system goes, okay, this is too much. And yet your body goes, well, let's just keep on going. And then you have the opposite thing where you try to relax, your system goes, no, 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 this thing is stressful.
Well, yeah, and it becomes a horrible cycle, and it's the treadmill that you can't get off of. It takes a lot. So when you are dealing with a client and they have some issues, what are some of the other are you giving them normal exercises to do, or what are you giving them as since you're the kind of the next step?
Sure.
What's your homework that you often give people?
Yeah, I tend to stay away from a lot of the more conventional teachings. Let's say if your back hurts, we got to make sure to strengthen the core, or like if your foot hurts, we have to make sure to do these sets of toe yoga exercises or whatever. I am more interested to know, well, what things would you like to start doing that you avoid now because of your pain? Because when you connect someone to things that are of value, there's more of a drive, there's more motivation, which often is its own little barrier when it comes to people who have chronic pain. So I'm looking a little bit more on values based goals and movements. And then I'm also looking at what they're interested in moving or doing. Because even if I believe that this one area of the body is the area we should move, they may not they may feel a lot of danger and threat in moving that specific body part. So it becomes more important for me to be like, well, what feels like there's like a happy medium where it might be somewhat challenging and you're still willing to move it, you're still committed to doing it, and there's lower levels of fear. So there's more of the feedback from the person that I'm working with rather than having this let's say a toolbox of exercises I might give somebody. And then I also will look at asking them more along the ends of, can you start to do cardiovascular movement with me? Just because I want to start to improve blood flow. Most people are less likely to be engaged in some sort of regular exercise and activity. So any movement, whether it's walking or something gentle like seated marches, or I joke around, but if you turn on music and you shimmy in a chair for 10 minutes, that's cardiovascular activity. Do you want to do that if you feel comfortable with that? So cardiovascular movement, general exercise, and then exercises that feel personal to them or something that they're interested in.
I love that so much. So how has your interpretation of pain changed since you started?
Goodness, so much. I don't know that I actually I think about this sometimes, and I know that I would have argued with myself when I was like 12 years ago when I first started. I would have not seen my point. So I think there's been a bit of juggling though in the evolution of it. I used to be purely like, okay, just look at pain as where you hurt. This is what we have to treat. There's something wrong with this area that is in pain. And then it moved as I wound up into the psychology end of things. Okay, it's just completely in the brain. And when we say in the brain, for the people that are listening, that does not mean your pain is not real. It is merely more a neuroscience perspective, meaning that your brain is a generator of all things, whether it's smell, whether it's your thoughts, whether it's your experiences, it's also in charge of your pain, and it is no less real just because we define it that way. But when I did get into the psychology end of things, I did become too brain heavy, I want to
Mhm.
say. And I was like, okay, well, it's all the brain, so we shouldn't be getting any movement based things. And then at some point in time, I was like, you know what? There's actually a medium. There's a happy space between the two of them. And truly, pain is about the whole person, the whole system. And when it comes to healing, it's about getting the body and your mind in balance, in alignment with what makes sense for your general health and healing.
Well, and I know for me, I after reading Dr. Sarno's book, said, "Okay, I get this. It's in my brain." And then I didn't know what to do next. And so I feel like you fill that gap because I know, at least for me, a lot of the hesitancy was getting back to exercise and being okay with it and knowing that I was safe if I did this particular thing because depending on who you are and depending how long you've suffered from pain, your world has a tendency of getting really small.
Mhm.
And like you were saying, you run into these circumstances where before it wasn't that big of a deal to go to the grocery store. But then now it's a thing where how far am I away? if my knee hurts, do I have to walk that far? I really don't need to do that because now there's, apps for everything, so I can just order stuff. I think that technology has unfortunately kind of caused us to regress a little bit where
Mhm.
there's a lot of things we don't have to do and we can be terribly isolated. And so then there becomes that. And what I noticed is also there's an increase in anxiety
Mhm.
because I don't want to go somewhere and then be in pain and either have you see me in pain and then feel badly for me or know that I'm in pain and then feel badly for me and then I have to be embarrassed or say that it's really not that big of a deal or something like that. So then it's just easier not to go. So there that piece is huge is really just having that bridge of saying I can do healthy movement
Mhm.
with someone on my side instead of just going, "Oh, well, your shoulder doesn't hurt," or something like that. Just go ahead and do the exercises and you'll be fine, not realizing there's a lot of emotion
So
and stuff that's behind that shoulder hurting, and it's not just the structural issue.
yeah, I don't know if you already I must maybe you did because you've read some stuff, but you just described the chronic pain cycle almost to a T, which is that circle of, okay, like pain, not moving, deconditioned, and thoughts and emotions, and then more social activity avoidance, and then more stress, which then factors into more pain. And people are in that hamster wheel of that vicious pain cycle. And truly, I think it can be sort of invalidating when you go see someone who's just they're like, "Hey, just movement is good." You're like, "Yeah, I know that." And like, how do I do that? And so the healing process is validating that person's experience and showing them, okay, how can we start to free up these areas that felt restricted or tight or trapped in both in a physical way and also psychologically and emotionally. There is that restriction, the thoughts and the emotions that you were describing. How do we start to tease open these windows? Because it is so common for people to make the choice of either avoiding or overdoing.
Mhm.
Underdo, overdo, underdo, overdo. And that's a cycle. When that middle ground is there to explore, but when you haven't practiced that, it can be very inaccessible. It could feel like you're not sure how to do it. It can feel impossible. So I love that experience and the way that you described that.
Yeah. Well, I know for me getting back into it, I was figured out what's going on. Okay, I know this is what's happening. And so then I wanted to kind of rejoin my friends, not realizing, they had been continuing their training. There had been nothing going on. And so for me to kind of hop into, it's like my beginning, but their, middle, that kind of thing. It didn't work. And so then I would blow up and then I'd go, oh yeah, next time you call, I'm like, no, I'm not gonna be able to make it,
Yeah. Yeah.
because I would overdo it. And I had spent a lot of years talking to doctors and trying to get them to understand that. Like I would describe that cycle every time and they'd go, uh-huh. And then they, do you want this pill? And it's
Yeah.
like, "Okay, well, sure, we'll try that pill, why not?" And then I'd call them like a week later, "Pill's not working." Like,
Yeah.
"Okay, well, don't know what to tell you," and then they would just wait me out to see if I'd call back or
Right.
try
Right.
something different.
Which is, I think, such a important thing to note that your doctors may have great recommendations and they're not necessarily equipped to give you the plan. It's like telling you, and I don't really love this because I think that doctors say this too often. I think if you lose weight, you'll feel better.
Mhm. Your
And
knee
then you're
won't
like,
hurt anymore.
okay, great. How? And they're like, just exercise more and eat better things. And you're like, I'm in pain, so I don't know how to exercise more. And I feel crappy about myself, so I eat a lot. So like you're telling me two of the hardest things, and neither of those are even still plans.
Yeah. No, that makes sense. So, if I'm a brand new physical therapist, how I don't know what school's like. So, is there a portion of this information that's starting to show up in schools? Like, how if I'm a physical therapist and I'm going, "Yeah, this is making sense," how do I start to learn more about this, or what did you do that they could possibly integrate this type of, information into her practice?
Sure. I want to say most colleges and universities nowadays are integrating pain science. To what degree depends on the school. Let's say I think there was a school in I want to say Texas that had Adrian Lowe, who was one of like the top pain PT researchers. He actually was one of the people that taught in my program. I want to say at the time it was called ISPI, which is the International Spine and Pain Institute, which I think now falls under something called EIM, Evidence in Motion. But that being said, I have seen some variability. Like some of the students that come in to see me, they're like, oh, this is all like new stuff or whatever. And then other people were like, man, I really had this experience in school. And then I also had an internship where the CI taught me, clinical instructor, taught me a lot about pain science. I'm like, great, awesome. I don't have to start from ground zero. I want to say very recently I explored talking to Duke, which was the program that I went through. And they do try to integrate pain science. The problem is that they have it oftentimes more as an elective,
Mm.
and they have it more at the beginning front end in terms of theory. And then they get really heavy in terms of movement science and exercise prescription. So oftentimes, even though students may have had exposure to pain science, they forget all of that because the thing that's in their face is exercise prescription. So there needs to be maybe a better job with integrating pain science throughout and having it more as a mandatory part of the curriculum, as opposed to electives like mindfulness or electives like pain science stuff. That's what I think needs to be the bigger shift. Because if you're not getting it in school, what is going to happen is a lot of students will have to explore it like I did, which is learn how to treat pain as a whole person perspective. And that's probably going to come through like continuing education courses way outside of your curriculum.
Well, at least it's there, and we can hope that it'll build up over the years, and eventually everybody will know about this, and it won't be such a strange thing. So you've been doing this for how long?
As a PT, 12 years, but I want to say pain science focused for over 5 or 6 years at least.
What is your proudest moment as a practitioner?
Oh my gosh. I I want to say it actually happened fairly recently because I had been working with someone who's had incredible trauma. We're talking about any type of trauma you could have, this person has had, including, almost being killed as a kid by their parents and all this other stuff. Yeah, I want to say last week they were talking to me and they just said, I realized through all this work that you've been suggesting that I do, that by no means do I expect anybody to do these things in and of themselves. This person happened to be doing it because they have just very inherent awareness and insight. And they've been working with me for a while. And they were just like, I just realized I love myself and I'm learning to let go of guilt. I had no idea how much guilt that I carried. And I realized, you know what? I don't need to carry this guilt anymore. And they were just going through all the insights they had. And I just had such a proud mom moment, which I totally said to them. I looked at them. I was like, just so you know, I'm going to have a proud mom moment because you're saying so many beautiful things. I just I was floored by it. And I also want to say, like, the work was not a lot on movement itself, and this is where the psychology part fits in, which is they said, now that I understand these things and I feel better, I'm starting to move again and walk again and it feels good. And so we want to remember that sometimes it's the mindset, the psychology, the emotions behind things that can actually prevent your nervous system from feeling safe enough to move. And once you tackle that and you have a little bit more flexibility in the nervous system, you have more flexibility with movement options. And I think that's what made me so proud with this person realizing it in and of themselves.
That's awesome. Yeah, the way that we treat pain in this country, or majority of the country, it's really about that disconnect. The drugs, or probably, I would say that's probably 90% of it, right? Is getting drugs so that I do not feel
Mhm,
whatever's happening.
mhm,
And by that starting the disconnect, then I think that's what people feel their solution
mhm.
is to disconnect from their physical self. And then, of course, your emotional self is like, hey, don't leave me behind. Let me go too. And so that coming back to yourself
Yeah.
and really realizing that you need to be present and you need to be in your body is a good thing to do. It's also extremely scary. And I commend you for holding space for that person because that is a challenge, and it takes a good amount of bravery, I think, to come back to yourself
Yeah.
and be okay with where you are and where you're heading.
Yeah. Dana, I think that's such a well put, like, number of sentences and paragraphs, because truly that's what happens is I think we see pain as the problem, and it feels so weird and inaccessible to hear someone say pain is your guide. It's a way of your body trying to ask you for help or to point you to the things that need healing. And when we have a medical system that treats pain as the problem and we continue to try to fight pain itself, we end up preventing that healing from taking place. And it really is a coming back to yourself, because the person I'm talking about actually, right before they had this epiphany, they're like, I don't want to look at that dark hole and look at all these scary things. And I'm like, I get it. And I just want to like let you know that you don't have to dive all in. You just are looking at one thing, kind of like I use the analogy of, when you go into a pool and it's super cold, most people don't want to jump right in. You want to go, okay, toe in and then back out, maybe go to the sauna for a while and then come back in again. You can do that in the healing process, allowing a graded exposure, if you will, of the nervous system to exploring some of these things that you've disconnected for a while. And when you finally come home, it can look exactly what that person had, which is just a beautiful transformation.
And so how is their pain?
Down. It's funny that you bring that up because I usually try not to focus on that. And I do know that that changes and that's important for people to recognize too.
Yeah. Well, it is because sometimes they don't when you're in that process, you don't even realize it's down.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
that's the funny thing is that as you're discussing what you may have discovered about yourself and the process in which you're working, and then all of a sudden you're all, "Wait, that doesn't hurt anymore."
Yeah.
And because I remember I did that with something where I was like, I was doing EMDR actually for an event that had occurred in my life, and every time that I would kind of relive this event, I would start crying, and I wouldn't be able to finish the story because of the fact that it was a very dramatic car
Mhm.
accident where everybody in the car got hurt, and
Yeah.
it was really super scary, and we were young and not really capable of processing
Sure.
everything that was kinda going on, and I wasn't able to get past it. And then after I did that session at EMDR, I was telling a girlfriend of mine, and I was running through the story, and I was super, pissed off, and I'm like, "Oh, I did this, and the lady, she had me do this stupid thing," and I was like tapping with my left hand, tapping with, "This is stupid," whatever. And then she's just like, "Dude, stop for a second." She's like, "Are you done with the story?" I'm like, "Yeah." She's like, "You're not crying." And I was like, "Ah, it worked." But I didn't even know because I was so stuck in the story.
Right. Right. Right.
Right,
Yeah.
because unfortunately, your story becomes a part of who you are, like, your pain story becomes a part of your personality, and it's so shocking when you snap out of it, and you're like, "Oh, crap, there's a whole world here, and I don't have to carry that around anymore."
Yeah. That's awesome. I love that.
But it's good. So, is there anything else that you'd like to share? Like, what are you up to, and what do you have to offer?
Well, I think that it is just because Dana and I talked about how it's so important for people to come back to the body. I think one of the best things to start to work on is just regular body check ins, whether that's, paying attention to your senses or just asking yourself how I feel in this moment. I also have a body awareness meditation exercise. So for people that want that from me, message me and say, hey, Dana Jones dash body, which maybe be a weird thing to put together, but like then I'll know where you came from and I know that you'll want that body scan meditation and I will send that over to you.
That's awesome. And how do we get in touch with you?
I am very active on Instagram, so find me on Instagram. Maybe Dana has them in my show notes. Otherwise, it's something funky like Dr. Period Cross.
We'll get it all in there. Alright, well, thank you so much for joining us.
Well, thank you for having me, Dana. I so enjoyed talking to you.
I appreciate it.